Hello everybody, it's Psychic Krystaline, and I'm here with an updated video on the quadruple murder in Moscow, Idaho at the University of Idaho. And so what I wanted to do is update you guys now that a suspect has been arrested. Bryan Kohlberger has been arrested as the main suspect in this quadruple murder. And one thing that validated it for me also, that I do see Bryan involved in this. I still don't see that he worked alone. I see an accomplice, or at least one or two more suspects that helped him. And I'll get into that later. But the first thing I noticed right away is I was picking up psychically that the person responsible for these murders was a student in the area that had lived outside of Moscow, Idaho, but had been living in there as a student. And so that was validated. Bryan has been found to be a PhD student, actually, in criminology, about less than 10 miles away at the University of Washington, or Washington State University, I'm not sure, WSU. Anyways, it's a short drive from Moscow. So he is a student working in that area. And so what I want to do is also discuss some of the things that I've gotten validated through news sources since, Bryan's arrest. And the first thing I want to talk about is Maddie being the target and the knife sheath being found right next to her body. And so for me, this validates that Maddie was the target. I feel like the suspect went in there and she was the first person that he went after. And so it's come out in the probable cause affidavit that the knife sheath for a K-bar knife was left next to Maddie's leg. And so to me, this, further validates Maddie as the main target. And also, I kept hearing he wore suspenders. And so a knife sheath would have to be like worn on a belt or suspenders or something like that. And so I also was picking up that, Maddie had told me he tried to force me to go down on him and I bit him. And so if there was an attempt to a sexual assault occurring in a struggle, I'm sure Bryan would have to take off suspenders to, do that. And it's also been found, they did a search warrant on Bryan's apartment in Pullman, Washington, and they found a receipt for a Dickies brand of something that he had bought. And Dickies does make coveralls and suspenders. So I'm wondering if that Dickies tag that they have in evidence has anything to do with suspenders, because that would be further validation that he wore suspenders and that's why the sheath was left. I don't think he intentionally left it there. And another thing, what I'll do is at the end of the video, I'm going to get into where I see the weapon and some more details about the weapon and stuff like that. And so another thing I wanted to talk about with Maddie being the target is that I kept hearing the word pizza place. And so we have now found out, it's been reported in News Nation now, that Maddie and Xana both were working at the Mad Greek Pizza. And apparently Bryan Kohlberger had been seen at least 2 times, and he stuck out to them, a previous worker, that he ordered vegan pizza from this place. So pizza place to me further validates Maddie being the target, not Kaylee, because Maddie and Xana were the ones working at the pizza place. I guess it's a Greek restaurant, but they served specifically vegan pizza, and Bryan Kohlberger is a strict vegan. And yes, I do see Bryan being directly involved in this murder, quadruple murder, but I definitely see he had an accomplice, which I'm getting chills on. Okay, and so let's get into the accomplice part, because I kept hearing other names that weren't Bryan, and I kept hearing he has a record. And as we know, Bryan doesn't have a record unless it was expunged when he turned 18, because from what I've read online, he was alleged to have been a heroin addict as a teen, became completely sober from heroin, which is so hard to do. And so he might have had a record and went to a treatment plan. I don't know. But I kept hearing he has a record and Bryan doesn't fit that. So that's the one thing that kind of further validates some of the other stuff that's come out. And so we've also found out that there was this Reddit survey that Bryan Kohlberger had put up asking felons specifically, which are people that would have a record, how they feel when they're murdering, what led up to it, and all kinds of like getting into the head of the murderers. And so hearing that, you know, they had a record and he was actually seeking out felons and interviewing them makes me, obviously I don't want to jump to conclusions like I always say, but it would make sense that if he was communicating with a felon that maybe they helped him come up with this plan or were the getaway driver, which maybe I'll get into that part now. So it's also come out in the probable cause affidavit that there's basically this 20-minute time frame where 4 people were murdered with a knife, one person by themselves. I think that's pretty improbable, but some experts, you know, seem to think that it would be easy to do, but there were 2 people in each room, so it was like he would have to subdue one, and I did hear they used restraints, so it's possible, but I definitely kept hearing they, and I don't think Bryan identifies as a they, so I'm still picking up multiple people. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. And so let me just look at my notes here. Yeah, another thing that's come out is Brian Enton has reported on News Nation Now that Bryan Kohlberger, when he was getting his master's in Pennsylvania, he frequented a brewery. I think it's called Seven Sirens or something like that. And he had allegedly had a confrontation with 2 female bartenders where he made, you know, advances on them sexually or flirted with them, and they were so scared of him that they banned him from the brewery and even entered it into the computer if his ID was ever checked to not serve him. And so, you know, it shows a pattern of being rejected by women and being aggressive with women, and that's what I saw is like he went into Maddie's work, getting chills, and she, you know, didn't pay attention to him, rejected him or whatever. And, you know, that was part of what led up to him targeting that house, basically. But I kept also picking up that something just pushed him off the edge. And what's crazy is I've been procrastinating a little bit on putting up this video, and it just broke last night or this morning. I saw on News Nation Now, Ashley Banfield and Bryan Enton are now reporting that Bryan actually got fired from his job as a teaching assistant at Washington State University. Sorry, I'm getting all tongue-tied. And so, like, leading up to the murders, he had been warned, had been coming in for meetings and in ways to improve his performance. So he was basically at, like, he wasn't fired yet, but there's like a process of paperwork, and, you know, we have to make sure, you know, we're meeting with him, and he's trying to, and apparently every few weeks he was going back in and not reaching the new expectations that they had, you know, put. And part of the reason why, you know, he was being reprimanded and having confrontations is because he had a hatred towards women, specifically in the way he was grading. And so that kind of validates too, like this incel motive. That's another thing. So remember I was hearing the word Chad, and so some of you have commented on my last video that Chad is symbolic for a privileged rich boy, or like a sorority and fraternity person would be like Stacy and Chad. And so the frat boys would be called Chads and the sorority girls sisters. And I kept picking up the motive was privileged kids and stuck up. And so Chad like totally validates the incel motive that I was picking up. I never even heard of the word incel. I just heard that's why they were targeted, is because they were privileged and, you know, stuck up. And, you know, the rage against the women and being rejected, mainly the big motive. And so, yeah, so he was fired. He was under review. Let's see what else is here in my notes. Yeah, so the more than one suspect thing. So, you know, from what I've read is there's these incel groups online where they get each other worked up, and like it's a big thing online where these people who are involuntary celibate because women have rejected them so much they build up this rage, and sometimes it gets to the point of murder. And so, Bryan, with the thought of like losing his job, which also could be connected with losing his housing and all of the stuff that was his like basic foundation in that area. Like he was going off the deep end, and I kept hearing something triggered him. And so losing your job or the threat, like he hadn't been quite fired yet, but he knew it could be coming because he had been to numerous meetings with his bosses and they were not happy with him. So right there, that could have just pushed him off the edge when he was already like wanting to target Maddie and was planning all of this, and so that kind of, put the nail in the coffin for him to just lose it. And so now what I want to do is get into the weapon. And so what I did was I doused a chart and asked Spirit, did he purposely leave that K-bar knife there as like to throw off the police, because it said military on, and, with the criminology background, I thought it could be a possibility. But I doused the chart and it's pointing to that the K-bar was used. But what I'm also seeing is that there are two weapons. I'm picking up two, I'm getting chills on this. So, whoa, that might also validate that there was a second person in the house and two people are responsible. Or I don't know why Bryan would want to use two knives unless, it was pretty brutal. One could have broken. I don't know. But it's pretty crazy. And I kept hearing double-edged and serrated on both sides. But yeah, so the whole knife thing, what I kept hearing is he threw it under the bridge or they threw it under the bridge. And so I asked Spirit while I was meditating, what direction did Bryan throw it under the bridge? And I was trying to hear anything else that would pop in my head in regards to the location of the weapon. And so what I heard was it was a rocky road and they threw it under the bridge. So it seems like it was a gravel road that, leads to a bridge, and he ran under the bridge or just threw it from above. If it was a rocky road, it seems to me like he might have drove up under a bridge and threw it in the water, or from above the bridge. I'm not sure, but there's a rocky road leading up to the bridge is what I'm picking up. And so, with the car too, I definitely feel pretty strongly that there was somebody driving around that neighborhood, and it wasn't just a 20-minute window of time. Like somebody dropped off Bryan and his accomplice, and then there was another driver, or I feel it's more that than there's actually just a driver and Bryan. I know it seems so like far-fetched because Bryan's a loner, but when I get stuff psychically, it's not what I think logically, it's what I'm getting from Spirit. It's still pointing to more than one suspect directly involved. And I even asked, like, not just the driver. So I think in the planning or even in the house, like there's more than one person. And the driver dropping them off would make a lot of sense with that 20-minute time frame because Xana had ordered food at a certain time. So we know, at least she was awake at that point. And so I don't think she would be up and ordering food if she had already had heard. Like, I'm pretty sure Bryan and whoever went straight up to Maddie's and Kaylee's room. I guess it was Maddie's room, and went after her first. There's another thing that was popping in my head too, and I forgot to put it in my notes, but I'm glad I just remembered. I heard it was a bloodbath. Obviously the whole house was a bloody scene, but I almost got the feeling that Bryan and the suspect went into the bathroom because I kept hearing more blood bath, like a bathtub. And so it's possible that they rinsed off in the bathtub before they left the scene. And maybe that's when, because it's also in the probable cause affidavit that Dylan, the roommate, one of the surviving roommates, saw Bryan, or a suspect that she described as having bushy eyebrows. But I did look on a map of the house, and there is a bathroom right there. I don't know if that bathroom has a bathtub or not, but that could be why he was on that floor where, you know, she had seen him. And so that could be the reason, you know, why she looked out and was like, I would definitely close my door too. And yeah, the whole thing about her waiting so long, I feel so bad for her. I can't even imagine being in that area, like in that house, hearing what she heard. And I'm sure we're not even hearing 1/10 of it because they need to protect the integrity of the case. But yeah, this is all the extra stuff I was picking up on. The weapon, I heard it's under the bridge, so it's in water. Oh, in the direction, I asked Spirit what direction, south, southeast was popping in my head. And then I also took out a chart and had directions, and it was pointing to south, southeast as the direction that Bryan went to dispose of the weapon or his accomplice with him, or weapons, because I am seeing that there's more than one weapon, which I didn't ask Spirit that originally. I don't know, but while I was doing the chart, I'm like, I just had this feeling that I needed to check to make sure. It just seems so crazy that he would plan this out so meticulously, hardly have any DNA on that sheath, and it would be left next to her body. Seems pretty careless for a criminology student. So, I mean, it almost seemed like it could have been he left it there on purpose, but no, I think it was on his suspenders, and when he dropped his pants, the sheath fell off, and I'm sure he was wrestling with them, and there was another weapon too. But you'd think he would remember when he was leaving that, oh yeah, I need to put that sheath in there. But I kept hearing too that they came up the hill with backpacks, so I think he had a backpack with him, so he could have just thrown the knife in the backpack in a panic or whatever after he rinsed it. And so, yeah, so there might be in the bathtub some DNA evidence as well. And they also have that white Elantra, so I'm dying to hear if there's other suspects' DNA, you know, in that Elantra. And, you know, I was like looking back and watching some of the earlier like news reports, and when they originally brought up the Elantra, they were saying the occupant or occupants, they kept saying plural of the Elantra, which, you know, they didn't say one person. They kind of said occupants and then backtracked that. And obviously, if there is another suspect out there, like, they don't want to tip them off because they could flee. But I was also seeing something on Twitter. I'm not sure, it was some sort of court document talking about an informant or a possibility of an informant. And so it's possible that the FBI and the authorities already have one of these other suspects and they're using them as an informant, but there still could be a third person. I'm not sure. But I keep getting this feeling that there's going to be another arrest before June, before the trial. Because I'm still picking up this was not a lone wolf, even though Bryan's a loner. Like, I think he was ganging up with either felons or other incels, and, you know, really, it's validating to me too. I'm so glad that this guy's in jail, because I kept picking up these serial killer vibes, and I mean, it's obvious, like, he got off on this. It's been shown by his cell phone data that he came back to that house 9:30 the next morning after the murders, before 911 was even called. I think he got excited and wanted to go back and get a rush off of watching and seeing if, you know, the ambulances were there or if anything was happening. And, like, he's creepy. I mean, he could have even got a little too excited sitting in the car watching, waiting to see what was going to happen. Like, he's so creepy. Anyway, this is all I have for now, and I definitely appreciate all the support. Please support my channel by sharing my videos, liking, and subscribing. And I will be uploading another video soon on a different serial killing case that I've been working on for 12 years behind the scenes. So that should be uploaded and finished shortly as well. I love you all. Thanks for your support, and I appreciate you. Take care. Thanks.